Welcome to another episode of Becca's Talking. I would love doing this every day. Every week we have a new podcast, somebody interesting story to tell, and today is absolutely no exception. I'm looking forward to this one. But it's brought to you by the fine folks at Havana Garage. Havana Garage at Omaha's Old Market. Now, I know we got people all over the country listening to this podcast, so if you're not in Omaha, you're thinking, well, why would I want to go to Havana Garage? It's worth the trip. I'm just saying. Havana Garage, it's a great cigar bar. You can go, you can relax, you can have a cocktail, have a cigar. Whether you're living in Omaha or just here on visit. Maybe you're in town for the College World Series or some of the other big events we have here in town. So come on down, Old Market, Havana Garage. Tell them Becca sent you when you stop on by. And enjoy the atmosphere. And even if you don't smoke a cigar, they smell great, and the cocktails and just they got kind of the Rat Pack atmosphere there. Anyway, they're fine sponsors of this podcast. We appreciate them, and we appreciate you if you go and patronize them and stop on by Havana Garage in the Old Market. Speaking about Omaha, that is the topic of today's podcast. The book is called Omaha. Omaha, it is based on the writings of Monsignor William T. Roach. Now, let me read the prologue to the book, and then I'll introduce you to Fletcher Reel, who wrote the book. Well, sort of wrote the book. Sort of wrote. We'll get into that in a minute. The prologue says, the following pages were discovered in the personal pages of Monsignor William T. Roach of the Cathedral of Our Lady of Evreux in Normandy. It's in France in 2020. Monsignor Roach grew up as an orphan on the streets of Omaha in the early 20th century and was elected the first mayor of Father Flanagan's Boys Town. He passed away at the approximate age of 102 years old in 2007 and is buried in the cathedral garden next to his brother. This is his story. Okay, so this is his story. This is what they call, historical fiction?
Historical fiction.
Okay, so let's talk about this. Okay, first of all, Monsignor William T. Roach. He was a kid basically living on the streets of Omaha way back when.
That's right. That's the fictitious. It's based on a true guy. There was a Billy Roach who was the first mayor of Boys Town, but the storyline about he and his brother growing up as orphans that's where fiction starts.
Okay, so how much of this is fiction and how much of this is fact?
Well, the part about the two orphans, that gives you your dramatic storyline throughout the book, and that's mostly fiction. And but everything else is pretty close to as factual as you could get.
Okay, and what I find interesting about this is that just Omaha in general. Omaha, we've got this image, and especially I think if you don't even live here, but the image of Omaha being like this, just good old aw shucks Midwestern town, just sort of a place where you go, good place to raise a family, have your kids and everything, and yet our history, not even close to that, is it?
No, it's not close. As a matter of fact, Omaha was the Las Vegas of its day. About 1920s, after World War I to about the late 20s, Omaha was Las Vegas. And as a matter of fact, most of the expertise to start Las Vegas in the 60s and 50s came from Omaha.
Yeah, we all know about Jackie Gone, who went to Vegas and started hotels and casinos downtown Vegas. And for the longest time, if you went to one of his hotels and you showed that you had an Omaha driver's license, you were comped the rooms, right? I mean, because there was that connection.
Yeah.
Exarban Racetrack was at one time considered one of the dirtiest racetracks. The Vegas casinos wouldn't take bets on it, right? Because of some of the unsavory characteristics of some of the people around here.
And as a matter of fact, Exarban was one of those places that was so secretive that I couldn't even dig into some of the stuff. I know that Billy Nesselhouse, who was the number 2 guy to the city boss, Tom Dennison, was a big track guy. He was one of the main forces behind it. And the idea for getting Exarban going came from a train trip to New Orleans, sponsored by the mob at the time. So
let's talk about it. Sponsored by the mob. Because what I found interesting about this book is that although it's talking about the foundation of Boys Town and how it grew, and because it started off downtown before it moved out west and everything, it's all about the start of Boys Town. It was pretty much the criminal element in town had an awful lot to do with the development of Boys Town, right?
Well, criminal element is a relative term. It was a boss-run city, and when that stopped is another discussion we can have. But there was the criminal element was the boss rule of the city. That was political, but they did a lot of good stuff. They wanted Boys Town to happen to get the kids off the street, which is better for business. So there was always reasons why they did things, and it was. But yeah, most of the city. First, you got to take it in mind. Omaha's a city of 100,000 people back in those days.
Right.
Everybody knew everybody, and there weren't a lot of secrets at the time. And most of the things that this book brings out weren't big secrets then. They are now, but they weren't then. And so you'd had a lot of really fascinating things that got going because of the people who did business with the mob.
Mm-hmm. Right. And plus, of course, the railroad coming through town had a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
And,
and that was the earlier part, but sure.
But the earlier part, I mean, it wasn't like all of a sudden 1920 hit and they stopped doing it. I mean, this was a dirty little rotten town basically from the beginning.
Oh yeah, particularly in the beginning.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, Tom Dennison, who plays a major role in this, was brought to Omaha specifically to clean up the gambling and to bring order to the organized crime. And he organized crime. And he was affiliated with the Western Gambling Syndicate, which, you talk about Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky creating the syndicate, back in the 50s.
Right.
But that concept was well in use in the Western Gambling Syndicate 50, 60 years earlier. Okay,
so you say Dennis was used to clean up the organized crime here in Omaha, but yet at the same time, didn't the county sheriffs and the deputies have to clean up like the Omaha Police Department during this time? I mean, there was a lot of corruption going on in the city back then.
Oh, it all was corrupt. It all operated on political basis. Everything was corrupt. And you did business, you had to pass muster with the city boss. I mentioned just a couple examples in the book, but you went to Tom Dennison if you wanted to start a business,
right.
Any business. And if you got crossways with Tom Dennison, you were out of business. And he controlled everything, like the Lord of the Manor. He really did.
Now, how did Father Flanagan end up in Omaha? How did that end up being all part of it? And then how did he get connected to Dennison, who connected him to the people that was able to supply the money in that for the start of Boys Town?
Well, that's 3 chapters in the book, so I'll try to boil it down. He came to Omaha originally from out east, and then it went to O'Neill for a while and met some people there and was very effective, and then got back to Omaha the same year, just a short amount of time before the big tornadoes hit in 1915, I think, or 14, right in that area. And right at that point, the bishop sent him to talk to Tom Dennison. He said, "We need help," because there wasn't government help in those. And if it did come, it was not for the immigrant communities, the black communities. It wasn't any of those. So he went to Tom Dennison. Tom Dennison helped get things organized. He was the government in a lot of respects.
Yeah. And so you put a more positive spin on Tom Dennison than I'd heard in the past. In that, because it was that he was the guy controlling. He was the boss man. He had, had a long run as mayor, and if you wanted to have anything done, you had to go through him. But you make him look like a more benevolent person than I'd heard in the past.
Well, everybody is a lot more complicated than we appear. And Tom Dennis was no exception. He was a guy that he was a good family man. He wasn't just a criminal. Today we see this one-dimensional guy, this gangster crime boss. That's not who he was at all. He was very much had 2 sides to him, and did a lot of great things in the city. Central High School, just one example, the architecture and the things he brought to the city he didn't make any money for that. He just wanted to do good things.
Yeah, because he was involved in Central High and also with what is now the TAC building. But at the time it was Tech High. And
more importantly, take the TAC building. They brought in Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and a couple other big-time names to open that high school. Those are the connections came from him.
Okay.
Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, all those celebrities that came in to support Boys Town and others, those came from Denison connections.
I was a kid growing up in Cleveland, and good old Catholic family, and I distinctly remember being a young child going to my grandparents' house, and on the refrigerator there were Boys Town stickers. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. Stickers on there, and I had no idea. I had no idea what Omaha was, let alone Boys Town. But I do remember these stickers on there, and they were my grandparents were big supporters of Father Flanagan's Home for Boys. It really was. There was a star-studded place, wasn't it?
It was, and that didn't happen by happenstance. Bozell Jacobs advertising, which I talk about, Morris Jacobs had been a newsie on the streets of Omaha, come up sort of in the tutelage of the machine, got educated, came back, and was working on the Bee newspaper when Tom Denison decided he needed an advertising wing and got Bozell Jacobs going to do, and they did huge amounts of good for Boys Town and a lot of other things in Omaha.
And there's an Academy Award in the Boys Town Museum from the movie starring Mickey Rooney.
And that's that's the thing that people can't. It's really hard, and I couldn't possibly do it in just 300 some pages. Yeah. There's so many things that happened because of that connection to all the different cities in the country because of Denison.
Yeah, and it really is. Like I said, I had the image of my grandmother's stickers, and then the image of Boys Town and the statues and all that. You mentioned that Exarban was pretty secretive about some stuff. You wanted to find out more about them, and they're pretty secretive about that. But Boys Town hasn't been the most transparent operation either. Did you have a tough time with Boys Town? Did you work with Boys Town on this, or how do they feel about the book?
That's a good question.
Why, thank you. That's what I'm here for. That's why people are watching, is because I ask good questions.
I got a little bit of pushback when originally this was put in as a screenplay, and I was going to try to do it as a screenplay, and had some people at Boys Town read it, and there wasn't a lot of support because it does buck the narrative right now. I mean, how it got started, and I can understand that there's so much, as we talked about. You couldn't have gotten this thing started without Tom Denison behind it somewhere. And there are a lot of questions, including all 4 first members of the board of directors at Boys Town. Why were there 2 Jews, a Catholic, and a Protestant on the first board of directors of Boys Town? That's an odd question, except that they were all majorly connected to Tom Denison.
And Tom Denison, who is majorly connected with the mob, but he was not a criminal.
Yeah, well, criminal's relative.
As we have found out in the last election, but that's another story for another day. So, you say this was written as a screenplay. Now that it's a book, is there interest in making this into a screenplay?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there is. How much, that there's a million miles to go from yes, there is to it gets done. Yeah. But there's a couple of producers right now that are looking at it.
So this Monsignor William T. Roach, he wrote this. Was it basically just a memoir that he wrote, or what? These were just notes he wrote. What did he have?
Well, he didn't exist in that way. That the foreword is just my own fictitious creation. So I needed a way to end the story that I thought was compelling, and that's how I ended up with that. This is the story of this old 100-year-old guy looking back on his life as a young kid. Wasn't necessarily a good kid when he started, but Father Flanagan changed that.
Right.
And that more, and mentioning Boys Town too is important because I see Father Flanagan, the more research that I did on him, a lot more important than maybe even Boys Town portrays him as. This guy just grit and determination and just this great heart created Boys Town, and you think about all the lives that he's saved. There's a symbolic life that he saves in the book, but that's symbolic of all the many things he did. And these 2 orphans that grow up and they have a pretty heroic ending. So,
and I've known people whose children have had to go to Boys Town, and Boys Town turned them around. I mean, no, you're right. I mean, what Boys Town has done is done an awful lot of good for an awful lot of people.
Well, and you think about, Father Flanagan pushed the barriers on race at a time when nobody was pushing the barriers on race.
Mm-hmm.
He was, Billy Roach, who is the main character, is black. And he was the first president of Boys Town, and Father Flanagan had a lot to do with that. And you think about.
So that part is real. That's not.
Oh yeah,
fiction.
no,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
all true, and
Yeah.
that's as much as he's based on.
Mm-hmm.
Billy Roach is actually a character who was black, and he was the first president of Boys Town. That's absolutely true.
Okay, so you mentioned Father Flanagan. There's been talk about sainthood for the man.
It's got my vote totally.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what about the other votes that are necessary to make this happen? Where does it stand? Do you know?
No, I have no idea. They have. There's all kinds of protocols for sainthood. You have to verified miracles and some
Right.
of those things. And I look back at history of sainthood, and I say, I'm not sure that everybody passed the muster on all these along. In a very substantive way, I think that Father Flanagan deserves to be a saint. But beyond that, we'll see.
Okay. And I've been told actually that they've actually got an area at Boys Town sort of reserved for a shrine when and if it happens.
Oh, well, there's a lot of space out there, so I'm sure that I'm all for it. Though I tried to make a good case for it.
Why did they? Because initially it was downtown, basically, like where would it be today? Like what was there? What is there now that where Boys Town was originally?
Not much. I'm trying to think exactly. There's the very first Boys Town, which I base most of this book on, was right behind Jocelyn Art Museum, where the Physicians Mutual building is. That's
Right.
where the very first building was.
Okay.
And then they were in the north. They were in North Omaha. They were in the German American Center. There were 3 or 4 places before they got it moved out to Overreach Farm, where they are now.
Okay, we're there now. Where at one point in time, we moved here in '72.
Right.
And I remember, my dad one day saying, "Well, let's take a road trip. Let's go to see Boys Town," and it really was a road trip because anything. I mean, there was not a lot even between Crossroads and Westroads, but once you got past Westroads, it was all cornfield. Now it's Midtown.
That's right.
But at the time, it was a thing. It was like, okay, we're driving into the country to go to Boys Town, and Boys Town at the time had its own farm. They produced all their own food, and that they don't do that anymore. They've sold a lot of that property to real estate developers, and their businesses popping up on that land now.
Yeah.
But what's the reason to move it out west like that, so far out west? Was that to get the boys away from some of the less than honorable people downtown? Or was it just a thing like, hey, we got cheap land out here, let's start something out here?
Well, what Father Flanagan had in mind was to build a self-contained village. I mean, he really was, we can sustain this on our own, we can plant our own crops, we can do whatever we need to be self-sustaining. And that was the main reason behind it. As far as the criminal elements and getting away from things, that may be true. I've never really heard about it.
I don't know either.
Yeah,
I'm just asking. I'm asking.
It's not a bad thought.
Yeah, because like I said, Omaha was a Wild West town back then. And we can go into this some other time about the history of Anna Wilson and all of that. And there were all these tunnels downtown where you could end up, the fine upstanding men could walk into the bank and then go into the tunnel and end up on the brothel and then come back out of the bank and I'm a fine upstanding man, right?
Yeah. Well, there's most of the institutions back then. The fine upstanding men were connected in some. Well, the Downtown Rotary, which I'm a happy member of right now, the first president of Downtown Rotary was a major player in Dennison's machine. Gould Dietz was his name. He's got a very nice mausoleum out on the cemetery.
Well, and Dietz also has there's a lot of other that name's been around for a while.
Well, he started the Red Cross too.
Yeah.
I mean, truly an upstanding guy, but he had to play ball.
You bring up an interesting point here because you say life is complex. There are really very few really good or really bad people. And you're right. I mean, you can do some bad things. I've done volunteer work out of the prisons, and I have found that there are some really bad guys that need to be locked up for a long, long time, And there are some good guys that just did some bad things.
Yeah.
And it is complex, where you could be part of, the syndicate, and at the same time, hey, let's start the Red Cross. Hey, hey, let's start a Boys Town. Let's do this. Let's build this hospital.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as truly good or truly bad.
Yeah.
Well, very little instances of truly good or truly bad.
I'm basically one of the people that believe that most people are good, but people are swayed by money and sex, drugs, rock and roll.
And I also agree with you that basically people are good. I agree with you on that. But there are some bad people, and one of them did stay at Boys Town, Charles Manson. Yeah. Oh, you don't.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. No. Actually, supposedly, there was a letter that Charles Manson wrote to Father Flanagan.
No kidding.
Yeah,
That's
or
what I
wrote to
hadn't
Boys
heard.
Town. I'm not all sure of the details, and Boys Town doesn't really want that.
Yeah,
that
sure they don't.
But and Manson wasn't there long. He was just there for and then he escaped and ran away and all that. So he was not given an opportunity to really turn his life around. But but Charles Manson was a Boys Town resident for a short period of time. But again, that's not something that.
Well, but it's true. I think there are those few people like Manson, and there's some others too that are genuinely just corrupted to the point of evil. So
well, no, that's it. But in most cases, as you point out, it's complex. And you can't necessarily all just look at one little incident and peg them on that, which is brought up in this book with Tom Dennison, who, like I said, prior to this, the information I had on him, he was just this. I just saw him as a cigar-chomping mob boss who ran the city, but he actually was concerned about making the city grow and actually improving the city.
Yeah, he was also famous for taking care of the dogs and cats downtown, being sort of an animal lover. And the story of his death was that he swerved to avoid hitting a dog with his car, and when he was out west, and had a car accident and died because of it.
Oh, wow.
Saving the dog. Whether that's true, I don't know.
And was the dog appreciative? No, the dog never sent a note, didn't send flowers, nothing. The dog didn't care. What made you interested in the story? Because this is a pretty extensive book. What made you interested to say, I want to put the time, the effort, and the energy into writing the screenplay and then now writing the book?
Well, it's actually a combination of factors. My grandmother knew a lot of these players. She was what you'd call a flapper back in the day.
Aha!
She was a very nice-looking lady in the 20s and danced and knew a lot of these guys. And when she was divorced in the early 50s, she got a job from her old friend and worked at the Fontenelle Hotel.
Uh-huh.
And Gene Epley set her up. And so when I was a little boy, or in the late 50s, going to see my grandmother at the hotel, I met a lot of these old gamblers that were still around, teaching me how to play three-card monte and card tricks and playing a few hands of this and that. I learned that stuff all, and so I knew about the machine way back.
Yeah.
And then Orville Menard, I took a class from him. He was a professor who wrote the book about Boss Rule in Omaha, and got to know him a little bit as in his class, and then read his book later. And then the luckiest part was marrying my wife, Colleen Brennan, who is both two sides of her family are connected to the old Boss Rule, and got a lot of inside dirt on some of the stuff there. So just a combination of things through my life. I just said, somebody's got to write this down.
Well, actually, on the back of the book, like all books, they have reviews and everything. And Steve Rosenblatt, the son of former Mayor Johnny Rosenblatt, of course, the stadium named after him and everything, talks about how, same thing, he knew a lot of these guys as a kid growing up. They were just hanging around the house.
Oh yeah, and Steve won't go into any detail, and he's got a lot more stories that weren't in the book.
Do we just romanticize the criminal element from back in that day as opposed to the criminal element today? I mean, back then it seemed to be, like you said, more of characters.
Yeah.
And the characters hanging out in the Fontenelle Hotel. As opposed to now it's somebody committing cybercrime or some gang member, with, shooting over drugs, Do we romanticize the old old style crime versus the new style crime, which really, in some cases, isn't all that different.
No, it's pretty much the same stuff. It's a matter of time. Today, us looking back in the 20s and 30s of the last century, oh, isn't that romantic? Isn't that interesting? But it's the same stuff.
Yeah.
And 30 years from now, we'll probably look at this era and create movies about cybercrime and all the things you just mentioned. We'll do the same thing again.
I got more questions for you here. The book is called Omaha, and I assume available on Amazon and
just about everywhere.
Pretty much everywhere you get books. You can find the book. Fletcher Reel is my guest. I want to talk to you about Havana Garage real quick. Havana Garage in the Old Market. The Old Market, which used to be back in the day quite a place too. Right there next to Jobbers Canyon, and Old Market was a place where you bought your fruits and vegetables. But now it's a place you go and have a cigar and a nice cocktail, along with a good meal. If you're going to spend some time downtown, maybe there's a concert out at C.H.I. or the Holland Center or the Orpheum, you want to go see a play, something going on downtown, make it a point to stop and have a cocktail or two at the Havana Garage and maybe enjoy a cigar or just enjoy the atmosphere. Tell them Becca sent you when you stop on by. But yeah, you talked about the history of Omaha. You can't talk about the history of Omaha without spending some time down in the Old Market. And when you're down there, make sure you visit Havana Garage. Okay, so now that Boys Town is got a gazillion dollars in the bank, they're well and they got well endowed. They're doing well, and they've branched out into being into hearing and medical concerns. Was that all part of Father Flanagan's plan in the first place? I mean, as far as branching out to do, medicine and to, build hospitals and then have branches all over the country. Was that all part of it, or was he just the guy that, wanted to, help the little waifs on the street?
I think Father Flanagan saw, we had so much with the Depression, and life was really hard 100 years ago.
Uh-huh.
I mean, and I think he was the guy that just really trying to find a place to save orphans, from the street. And beyond that, I think that the answer is no. I don't think so. I think he was looking at at boys and trying to. I think that's as far as his vision went on that. But you had guys like Pat Brookhauser, who came in and started the Boys Town Research Hospital that dovetailed into all of that. And I think he's one of the guys that pretty much came up with a lot of that.
Do you know how much research did you do into Father Flanagan prior to Boys Town? In other words, yeah, I know that he was born in Ireland, raised in Ireland, and then he had school in Austria, right? And
Innsbruck, yeah.
How did he end up in Omaha? And is there anything in in his background that would have made him interested in helping these young kids?
Well, speculation is all I've got for you.
Uh-huh.
But one of the things he did that I think was really exciting, in a good way, is he came up in the Irish boarding school system, and they.
So was he an orphan?
No, he wasn't. His family, but everybody in Ireland was poor.
Yeah.
I mean, dirt poor, and the church provided the school system, and a lot of things that we've gone through the turmoil of priests and bad behavior in this country was going on then in Ireland.
Uh-huh.
And after World War II, he made a pretty outspoken challenge of what was happening there and in other places. It got swept under the rug pretty well at that point, but he stepped up a long time ago to do some of those good things.
So he was just that guy. You don't know of any one particular incident or something that went and
nothing that I've ever heard of. Just a good man who, he had to have some genuine confidence and ambition to do what he did.
Yeah.
And but where's that inspiration come from? It's a pretty godly thing. So
and if you we talked about doing the ads for Havana Garage and everything, but if you haven't been, and a lot of times people in Omaha, people in any city, they don't go to the places where tourists go. If you have not been to Boys Town, there's a phenomenal museum there.
Oh yeah,
there's a phenomenal museum there that tells a little bit of the history of it, and that you can also go and see some of the old buildings that started it there that are still up and standing and being used. You can go and do that. And they've also got and I don't know why, maybe you do, they've also got the world's largest ball of stamps. Is there a story to that, or do you know? Or
I have no idea.
Neither do I.
I've seen it. I've heard about it.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah, neither do I. It's just one of those things where they just started collecting stamps and they turned it into a ball, and it started out like this, and the next thing you know, it's like that. So if you're visiting Omaha, make sure you hit Boys Town and see the world's largest ball of stamps. And then when you go back to your home, you can be the only person in your hometown that can say that. So then you'll have something unique to say. So, okay. Is there anything in this book here that we haven't talked about? I don't want to give away the whole story because there's an awful lot in here about the formation of Omaha. It's not just about Boys Town. It's also about the people behind it and how they became so involved with Boys Town, and an awful lot here about what the city was like back then.
Right.
Is there anything here that you don't want to talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, I think one of the more interesting backstories to this is the whole political. How did Tom Denison control an entire city? This guy comes in from out of town, and all of a sudden he's in charge. And the answer to that is really fascinating because we're seeing the exact opposite today. Tom Denison's base of power was North and South Omaha, the black vote and the immigrant vote. That's how he controlled Omaha. And you might say, well, how is that possible? And the reason is that most of the rest of Omaha was fairly evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. And then he went in and he organized North and South Omaha, and so 80+% of those wards would vote for whoever he wanted.
Right.
And that swayed the election. That's why he was able to, Cowboy Jim Dahlman, who was a Democrat, Denison was a Republican. He never let partisanship get in the way of control. But he was able to elect Cowboy Jim Dahlman. I think it totally served like 23 years as the mayor of Omaha.
Why doesn't Omaha do a better job in talking about some of this stuff? Because I personally find it fascinating. And then, like if you go to places like, you go to Arizona, towns in Arizona will have old Wild West reenactments, or you go up to Alaska and pretty much every town along the coast inside passageway there you go to, every town has a bar or two that used to be a brothel. Omaha doesn't do anything like that to promote, some of the wilder days of our city, and I think it's to our detriment. Because I think it helps build an image. It helps to build a maybe just a little bit of more history, and people have more pride in their city.
An identity.
Yeah, precisely.
Well, if you look at when Tom Denison left in 1933, the enemy won. The reformers came in. And when I talk about reformers, we think of that word as like a good thing today. But the reformers were anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant, anti-black. There was the underpinnings of the Ku Klux Klan was involved with these people. They took over. And when they took over, they wrote the narrative for the next 30 years. Omaha had really strong, good race things going on, including, and I talk about the race riot, but there was a lot of good things. There was blacks in government. There were blacks. It was very progressive for its age. But in 1960s, this is one of the worst places you could be for the civil rights riots.
Yeah.
And I think it was because of retaliation in some respects.
Really?
Yeah.
You talk about how
30 years later is all.
That's what is so weird about it, because you think about this as being 200 years ago, but it really wasn't all that long ago, was it?
No, it wasn't.
In the grand scheme of things. And you talk about North Omaha. North Omaha was basically the black part of town, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you went further north into Florence, that's where a lot of the power, a lot of the money was, right?
Yeah, so beautiful homes up. That's where Tom Denison for a time lived right off what's the park right there? I can't think of it. Just south,
right on 30th there. Yeah,
I can't think of the name of it.
But
But that was very affluent. And
Was it Miller? No, anyway.
Miller Park.
Yeah.
But I remember in the 60s before the riots, North Omaha, there was a lot of very nice places there.
Right.
Nice homes, and I remember gardens and flowers and all kinds of things.
Yeah, and of course, then they blocked off 16th Street to try to, segregate.
It was nasty, and people, it got really nasty and really racist after 33.
Yeah, and it does seem to be better, at least. I hope so, at least from my perspective.
Oh, that's a whole nother
That'll be another podcast with another guest at another time. But as I mentioned, the book is called Omaha. My guest, Fletcher Reel, who wrote this based on the recollections of the first mayor of Boys Town, William T. Roach, who wound up being an old man over in France, where he died at about 102 years old. Why did Monsignor Roach go to France?
Well, again, that's more of he was, according to the story, which is all fiction, was that he and his brother, who was white, Nate, went to Notre Dame and was a football player at Notre Dame and followed the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse and all that's part of that storyline. And then he goes on and is a successful attorney. Billy Roach wants to be educated as well. He's a very smart kid, but being black in America, there weren't the opportunities to get educated. So he ended up going to France, to Paris, to be educated there, and then came up through the church.
If you're a history buff, you got to check this out. Omaha, Fletcher Reel, my guest. Thank you very much for your time.
Great, dude. Thank you for having me.
You're right. You bet. And don't forget, make it a point to visit Havana Garage in the Old Market. Havana Garage in the Old Market, which is, it's a modern part of Omaha, but it's also a very old part of Omaha. And the Havana Garage is one of the cornerstones of the place. So check it out. Have a cocktail, have a cigar, and just enjoy yourself at one of the crown jewels of Omaha's Old Market. Till next time, tell your friends. By the way, go and do all the like and subscribe and all that stuff so that you know about all the upcoming podcasts coming up, because we got a lot of great guests, a new one every week. Tuesdays at 2 a.m. Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Tuesdays at 10 a.m. New podcast comes your way. Till next time, take care and bye, y'all.